a lot of what Aaron mentioned regarding tariffs, trade challenges will pretty much influence all commodity markets as far as agriculture is concerned in some form or fashion. And and when you get down to it, it's hard to speculate on what's going to happen, especially when the White House even gives a little bit of mixed information as they proceed. So I'm going to try to avoid making statements that revolve around an expectation of what might or might not happen from that standpoint, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So just I mean, the 30,000 foot view of what's going on in the cattle market is that market prices have been really, really strong. The cow calf producers making a lot of money right now if they are managing in any form or fashion their cost. Heifer retention has not really started from a national perspective. There are certainly some states that retained heifers, but most of them didn't, and a lot of that was due to continued drought concerns. And Aaron and I were actually talking about just the dryness that we have in Tennessee, across most of Tennessee anyway, even in as we try to exit winter time when we typically get a good quantity of moisture, and yet we're still dry. Uh, and then as you look through the margin operators, working up through the margin operators, they've got a lot more dollars invested, but their margins aren't really going to be much different, or they could be smaller, as both cattle feeders and packers are paying more and more for their input. Their outputs are not generating the same revenue always to capture a profit from that standpoint. So to dig a little deeper, I think it's very amazing that we have exceeded $2 for finished cattle now. So if you think about a 1,500 pound steer, and we topped out about $2.10. So a little over $3,000 for a finished steer is pretty stinking amazing. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, as I have in many of my past meetings recently, that it wasn't too long ago, a few years ago, a lot of cattle producers would have been tickled to receive $2 for a 500 pound steer, much less $2 for a finished animal. Granted, now, here's the 5 and 6 weight steer prices. Now, 5 and 6 weight cattle are over $3 and have been over $3 pretty much the entire first 2 months of the year. How long will they stay over $3? I don't know, but I think in the near term, I think they should. As I was doing a meeting last night, one of the comments that I made was from the standpoint of, the hottest animal out there right now, is from a price standpoint, or the one that everybody's looking for, are those heavy 4 weights, light 5 weight, thin flesh cattle that don't have any fat on them at all. Because as grass starts to green up, everybody and their sister that grazes some calves wants that type of animal, because they know that they're going to be winter hardened, so they'll be pretty hard. They're not going to be as likely to get sick, especially if they're a little thin this time of year, because if they come through the winter thin, they're going to be a pretty hard calf, and you can throw them out on grass, and so the likelihood of getting sick is really small, and they're going to gain weight in a hurry regardless of what they're eating. And so that's the animal that's really hot right now. Now, that doesn't mean that's what your producer should be selling by any stretch of the imagination, but that's the animal that is going to bring a really, really strong price, but maybe not the highest value that they could achieve. But still, when you're talking about 550 pound steers, over $3, we're talking about $1,650 a head or more for a 550 pound steer. That's just pretty stinking amazing. Actually, a lot of these calves are up over $1,700 to $1,800 a head. And when you think about a person buying a high risk calf at $1,700 or $1,800 a head, their death loss has not changed any. They still have the same risk of death loss, but they just have more dollars invested in that single animal. Looking at 7 to 8 weights, very similar trends. I've been above year-ago levels so far the first 9 weeks of the year. Continue to expect those animals to stay above that level through pretty much, I'd say, most of 2025, unless something, an anomaly occurs of some sort that influences the cattle markets. Now, the animal that's going to be a hot ticket for sure for the next 2 or 3 years are going to be slaughter cows. We've cut so deep into the cow herd that we're just not going to uh, have enough lean grinding beef. So when we don't have enough lean grinding beef, it's going to encourage more culling of cows. They're going to increase those prices because they want them that much more. Producers should certainly be thinking about how they can get a nice salvage value out of those cows. If you have cows that failed to calve this spring, maybe they need to be moved on out in May or June. Or if they do calve this spring, maybe early weaning the calves, which essentially just means leave the calves with the rest of the cow herd, but take the cow that needs to be culled onto the sale barn and proceed from there. But we're gonna top over. We'll probably easily beat $1.50 on slaughter cows. So if you took a 1,200-pound cow at $1.50, that's $1,800 a head. That doesn't pay for a bred heifer to replace her by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a pretty good salvage value for that particular female, and it does provide some money to get started on paying for a female to replace her. So that's just something to think about moving forward. Now, so far, we've had all of our slaughter has been down, whether it be for heifers, steers, or beef cows. Continue to see that beef cow number be a huge decline because we just don't have as many of them, and everybody's trying to get as many calves as they can out of them. So just keep them one more year, one more year, one more year. Despite that, beef production's actually up slightly so far year to date, and a lot of that just has to do with the fact that we are finishing cattle so much larger. They're just so much bigger. Last year, we were 20, 30 pounds heavier than we were the previous year, and so far this year, we're essentially doing the same thing. Now, I don't know how much bigger we can grow these cattle because there's no way we grow them to the size of an elephant. At least in the near term, we don't. And I guess the thought is here is at some point you can keep growing and growing and growing, but you'll then end up with some type of problem of some sort. And I mean, I can use as a silly example, if you keep growing these animals bigger and bigger and bigger, at what point do they start having feet and leg issues where they can't even stand up or hold their own weight? We see that in people sometimes. We see that in other types of animals, and so we need to consider that other things may have to change if we're going to continue to grow these animals bigger and bigger and bigger. But anyway, because of that, so far we've increased beef production. I do expect pork production to pick up a little bit more, even though it's down slightly. And the broiler industry has finally been able to start increasing their production, and I expect that will continue as well. So we're going to see a lot of meat on the market. It may not be there may not be as much beef as what we have had at some point, but beef production is going to remain strong just at least the first 6 months of the year, simply because of the number of cattle that are on feed and the size that we're growing those animals. Now we get into the import-export situation, and imports were really this shows all of last year because that gives you a good picture of what happened last year, and we should expect the very, very similar thing to happen in 2025. We'll see a bunch of imports early in the year, and a lot of that's being spurred by Brazilian imports of lean grinding beef, because most of this beef that we're importing is lean grinding beef, and we need that because we're not slaughtering as many of those cows that we need to provide the lean grinding beef that our country demands. Based off of imports, the countries that we primarily import beef are not who we're having trade wars with right now, so that's not a huge issue. But on the export side, they are, because when you get down to the export side, I'm amazed at how strong exports were in 2024. But moving into 2025, 3 of our 5 top beef export markets are struggling with potential tariffs or tariffs that have already been imposed and their retaliation will more than likely influence beef in some sort. So the next slide will show that, but just briefly show you here that we continue to import a lot of lean grinding beef from Australia. Again, this goes through December, so that January number will see a big spike in the red line, which is Brazil. So January and February will be a lot of Brazilian beef coming into the marketplace. But Australia will continue to be strong, and the only reason why New Zealand's not strong is because they've had a few struggles within their industry. We'll see how the Canada issue plays out, but I don't think on the import side, Canadian beef coming, Mexican or Canadian beef will still be pretty consistent. It's on the export side that I think we'll see some issues. As you see, Japan and South Korea remain the top two markets, but Canada, China, Canada, and Mexico are the three next largest export markets, and those are the three countries where we have the proposal or imposition of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and then a 20% tariff on Canadian goods, and so we'll see how that plays out. But it could influence our market in some form or fashion. Box beef prices remain fairly strong, though packers have been trying to manage slaughter levels to some degree because they don't want to put too much beef on the market. Even though production's over a year ago, they're still trying to manage that production because prices are so high. They're losing money in many instances based off of what they're paying for cattle and what they're receiving for box beef. There have been some weeks where the cost of a dressed carcass was more than the price of box beef. So that's almost a guaranteed loss in that situation. This kind of gives you that outlook on what we think heifer retention can be and won't be. You know, this represents February 25th, so last Thursday. I guess technically Tuesday, but it was put out last Thursday. You know, there's still a lot of this country where cattle reside that is in pretty severe drought situations. Aaron mentioned the wildfires in South Carolina. You can see there that coastal area. You know, when you see Florida in drought, a place where it seems to rain every day to some degree, you know there's some struggles. But essentially, our entire East Coast is in some form of drought right now. And I think, in my opinion, I have seen across the state of Tennessee, even though it shows just some moderate places of drought in Tennessee, I would be willing to say that we're in a much drier situation than what the drought monitor demonstrates here. So large portions, when you look at Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa, Minnesota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, all those places, a lot of cattle, a lot of drought. You know, will heifer retention be possible? Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, you know, this thing could turn around, start getting moisture, start getting good forage production over the next several months, and it could change things quickly. But right now, it looks like even heifer retention this year could be a struggle for some regions. Corn prices, as of, well, I'll just say from a futures market standpoint, we've seen pretty much cattle and feed grains and soybeans all take a pretty good hit. I was pretty amazed on the number of acres that USDA are projecting to be planted as far as corn is concerned in 2025, and that's part of this decline in these cash corn prices because the futures market took a pretty good hit after that information. How accurate is it? I don't know. They'll change those numbers at some point, but right now the USDA has this expectation of really, really strong corn acres, and so that has reduced corn prices, which is good for the cattle feeder, good for those feeding cattle in any form or fashion if you're using a feed grain. We got the latest data out of Kansas. I guess this was last, mm, I don't remember what week it was, maybe 2 weeks ago. It seems like it was last week, but maybe 2 weeks ago. And it's fairly cheap to feed cattle right now. I mean, when you look compared to a year ago, the cost of gain in the feed lot is nearly $20 a hundredweight lower than it was this time a year ago. Pretty much on par with the fourth quarter of 2024. But with the decline in corn prices and the expectation of strong corn planted acres, that would probably mean that we're probably going to have depressed corn prices, which should keep feeding costs down for a while. That does create some margin potential for the feedlot or their ability to pay a little bit more for cattle. Based off of yesterday's close on the futures market, the March market closed just shy of 274 at 273.85. That's several dollars off the high that we experienced last Friday. There was a good pricing opportunity there. I do encourage people to take advantage of the futures market or of livestock risk protection insurance in the current environment, because there's nothing wrong with securing a really nice price, even if the market continues to go up. So it's worth spending a few dollars there. The August was at 274 yesterday. It was up slightly yesterday compared to the previous day. And so again, a very nice pricing opportunity for selling cattle in the summer. Most of the contracts are similar to this. So with that, I have finished cattle being somewhere around $2 pretty much the whole year. I don't know that we're going to be pushing back up to 210 anytime soon, but we should be averaging somewhere around $2 most of the year, the way I see it. And then here's kind of the projection for what we're looking at for those 5 and 6 weight cattle that are typically sold, and then the 7 to 8 weight type load lots. Granted, we now see more and more load lot cattle being sold closer to 900 pounds than we do 800 pounds, or over 900 pounds for that matter. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're growing cattle bigger in the feed lot, spending more days on feed. And so send a 900-pound calf out there, put 200 days on them, and at 3 pounds a day, and you end up with a 1,500-pound steer. So that kind of gives you an idea there. And with that, I do think that we'll have good prices for the next 3 years. A question was asked last night that if I actually thought that the 3 years was feasible, and if you just think through the actual reproductive cycle of these animals, since we haven't really retained any heifers, that doesn't mean that there's not some out there right now that can't be retained, that were not designated to be retained, but real decisions on heifer retention will come from this spring calf crop, and those decisions will be made in the fall. And from that standpoint, you're looking at any heifers that are retained from this spring's calf crop before it's going to be 2 years before any of them actually produce a calf and put a live calf on the ground, which would then be 2027. And then that calf, it takes at least 15 to 18 months before that calf that it produced actually is sellable beef. So you're looking at, that's over 3.5 years before the beef production really changes much at all. So, to me, that tells me we should have 3 more years of strong cattle prices.